Hello 1000 PS friends and a warm welcome this time from the studio with a proper highlight, and not just for Suzuki fans but for everyone who's been waiting for a brand new liter bike. Hard to believe, but it's true. For the 40th anniversary of the GSX-R series, we're getting a new GSX-R1000R for the European market next year, and I'm going to tell you what it looks like and what's inside. Right, so as I said, we're getting a new GSX-R1000R, that's its actual name. And the reason we're doing a model presentation now, at the end of July, is quite simple. This weekend, the legendary Suzuka 8 Hours Endurance Race kicks off in Japan, and Suzuki will be entering that race with this new GSX-R1000R. So, they're tying together the 40-year history of the GSX-R with this historic race. And that's why we got the news yesterday that we'll be seeing this new GSX-R1000R from May 2026. And now let's dive in and take a proper look at what this bike is all about. Quick personal note, I actually used to own two GSX-R1000s myself, so I'm a bit hooked on this topic. They were a K5 and a K6. The two legendary models, and I have to say I'm absolutely thrilled that Suzuki decided to launch a new one. The last GSX-R1000 we saw in Europe was back in 2017, and it was sold up to 2022. So for anyone who's been keeping up, it's obvious that to get a new model out for 2026, it has to meet the Euro 5 Plus emission standard. And that's exactly what this bike does. Now let's look at the details. We've got a completely new design, quite a few engine updates, some tweaks to the chassis, changes to the electronics, and a few new visual features as well. Just to be clear, visually and technically, the bike's been refined in many places, but overall it's not an entirely new motorcycle. I'd say it's not a revolution, but rather an evolution of the previous GSX-R1000 brought into the modern era. Let's maybe start with the engine. I'll give you a few key figures so you've got a clear picture. We're still looking at an inline 4-cylinder engine with just under 1000 cubic centimeters, of course liquid cooled. That's a given. The bore and stroke ratio is 76 mm by 55.1 mm. Compression has been increased to 13.8 to 1. And the big question, what kind of power are we talking about? We're looking at 195 brake horsepower at 13,000 RPM. That's a bit less than before. Why? Because of the Euro 5 Plus emissions regulations. Torque peaks at 110 Newton meters at 11,000 RPM. For those interested in emissions, carbon dioxide output is 158 grams per kilometer. You'll now see the engine in the images we're showing, and everything highlighted in yellow shows what's been updated. That's all been reworked to meet the Euro 5 Plus standard and align with the concept behind this new GSX-R, because this bike has been developed primarily for track use. I actually rang up Suzuki Austria yesterday for some background info. This new engine has slightly less power than its predecessor, but that one was still Euro 4 approved, where emissions and noise limits weren't quite as strict, so it was easier to squeeze more performance out of it. So while this new model may have a bit less power on paper in its street homologated version, if you run it with an open exhaust and race mapping, it should make significantly more power than the previous model. Hopefully we'll be able to test that next year once it becomes available, ideally at a 1000 PS track day. Now let's get into some more technical details. Suzuki's variable valve timing system is still in place. What makes it special is that it operates using centrifugal force. So it's not an overly complex setup. In fact, it's relatively simple from a technical standpoint. It was introduced back in 2017 and naturally has been kept and further refined. There are also a few minor updates to the valvetrain. For instance, the valves now have a DLC coating. The exhaust valve diameter has been slightly increased. There are changes to the camshafts too. The cam profile has been adjusted and the timing chain has also been revised. All of this is aimed at meeting Euro 5 Plus regulations, but also at ensuring there's plenty of top-end power available, especially when you're riding on track and not restricted by emissions rules. The fuel injection system has also been updated. Suzuki is using a twin injector setup. There's one injector positioned directly in the intake tract and another higher up right after the airbox, where the air first gets drawn in. What's changed is that the lower primary injector has gone from 10 spray holes to 8, but they've been reworked. The upper injector remains the same. More updates. The cylinder head has been optimized, the head gasket improved, and the forged pistons are newly shaped and lighter. That's another area where they've trimmed some weight. The pistons also get a DLC coating. There are new piston circlips as well. The timing chain has been made wider, and it now uses a demand-based lubrication system. The goal here is to save a bit of weight and avoid unnecessary lubrication. It only kicks in when it's actually needed. The intake funnels have been slightly revised, particularly on cylinders 1 and 4, to provide more consistent cylinder filling and ultimately higher power at high revs. There's also a new crankshaft design with reinforced bearings built to handle greater loads. The exhaust system has been updated too. You can see it in the photos. Suzuki says they've made it slimmer and better looking. Personally, I still think it looks quite big, but again, we're talking about Euro 5 plus regulations. That means a lot of noise and emissions have to be managed somehow, so compromises are inevitable. They've also made changes to the catalytic converter. It's now positioned closer to the engine, so it heats up more quickly, helping the bike reach the correct emission levels sooner, and so on. So overall, Suzuki hasn't changed the basic engine concept, but they've reviewed every component related to performance and emissions and looked at where they could make improvements. And in the end, that's how we're getting a new GSX-R1000 in 2026, which I've got to say is pretty damn cool. Of course, there have also been updates to the chassis and suspension. I should mention that we received a technical document covering all the changes for the 2026 model. It's 55 pages long. Unfortunately, the section on the chassis was rather brief, so I can't give you all the specific details about the forks or the rear shock because they simply weren't mentioned. What I can tell you is that the main frame, the twin spar aluminum frame we already know, has been tweaked a bit more. It's been tuned for racetrack use. The goal was to build a bike with very high performance. The swing arm has also been modified. The aluminium swing arm has been reinforced, and its stiffness has been optimized specifically for track riding, not necessarily for the road. That point was emphasized several times in the press release. There's also a new lighter subframe made of square aluminium tubing. Again, weight savings were the focus here. And of course, as you'd expect, there are optional winglets. Personally, I really like that they're optional and not fitted as standard. That way, the bike doesn't look as bulky as some of the other current superbikes. The chassis also features new lightweight 6-spoke aluminium wheels. We all know that lighter wheels are beneficial for handling, braking and acceleration, so that's always a smart upgrade. The bike also comes fitted with new tires, Bridgestone RS11. That tells you again that while the road rider has been considered, the focus is clearly on the racetrack. The RS11 works well on the road, provided it's warmed up and the weather's good. But it also offers a bit of track day performance built into the tire. It's the kind of tire you can ride from home to the circuit on. Lower the pressure once you're there, push it hard on track, and then ride back home again, as long as the tread isn't completely gone. So in my opinion, it's a really solid choice for a first fitment tire. Moving on to the brakes, there's been an upgrade here too. As you'd expect, it's top-shelf Brembo kit, 4-piston monoblock calipers at the front, paired with two 320mm discs. Each piston has a diameter of 32mm. There's a general trend towards slightly smaller piston diameters, and Suzuki's followed that trend. There's also something interesting going on with the brake discs. They're using a Brembo system, but not just the usual round floating mounts. They've also added what are known as T-drive floaters. As the name suggests, the T-drive mounts are shaped like a T. And what Suzuki's done is combine the two types, so you've got both T-drive and traditional round floaters on the same disc. It's a compromise between weight and comfort. Technically, T-drive mounts are better for high-performance use, but they tend to rattle a bit more and are slightly lighter in some areas. So to strike a balance between road and track use, they've gone with this kind of hybrid disc setup. I think it's a really interesting approach, and honestly, I haven't seen it on any other production bike. One more detail, there have also been a few aerodynamic updates. As mentioned, the optional winglets can provide a bit of extra downforce if needed, and the entire front end of the bike has been reworked to improve aerodynamics. So the whole bike is more streamlined and performance focused in terms of airflow. Now we come to a major area of development on the GSX-R1000R, the electronics. But just to be clear, a lot of what we're going to talk about here already exists in other Suzuki models. What they've done is bring everything together into this one bike. So, what's included? Naturally, we have Suzuki's drive mode selector with 3 riding modes available. There's also a diagram, hopefully we can show it, that illustrates how throttle response varies between the 3 modes. Of course, there's traction control, it's 10-stage and fully switchable. That traction control is also linked into the rest of the electronic rider aids. There's loads you can configure, but traction control is basically the brains of the system. So within Suzuki's electronic ecosystem, we also have ride-by-wire, of course, because without it you wouldn't have riding modes. There's also a quick shifter with blipper function, so you can shift up and down without using the clutch. There's cornering ABS as well, which Suzuki calls the motion track brake system. That means it's cornering ABS controlled via the 6-axis IMU built into the bike. It constantly monitors the bike's state and adjusts braking accordingly. It's clear from the press material that Suzuki aimed to provide maximum stability under braking. That said, with the 10-level traction control, you can dial back the electronics to the point where, in levels 1 to 3, the bike is clearly operating in a high-performance mode. The rider aids become far less intrusive, so at that point you really do need to know what you're doing. In other words, you can't just rely blindly on the electronics in more critical riding situations. The bike also features Suzuki's usual easy start and low RPM assist systems. Basically every electronic aid currently available from Suzuki has been included. The only thing missing is electronic suspension. The forks and shock are still fully manual. From the photos it looks like we've got a Showa BFF fork up front. The rear shock couldn't be identified. But again, we're talking about a standard suspension setup, no electronic adjustment here. One controversial point in terms of electronics is the display. Let me be honest, there's no fancy TFT dash here. It's an LCD panel. I asked specifically why a high-end superbike would come with an LCD screen. And apparently the reason was cost. Personally, and I'll say this openly, I'd have liked to see a TFT here. Suzuki already has some really nice TFT displays in other models. Clear, well-organized and bright enough, so there's no reason why one couldn't have been fitted. On the other hand, this bike is clearly aimed at track riders, people who do a lot of fast road riding too. So I can imagine that while the LCD might not look amazing at first, as long as it's bright and high contrast enough, it probably won't make a difference on track. And given that Suzuki's electronics and rider modes are quite user-friendly and clearly laid out, I think that apart from the initial visual impression, it's probably fine in terms of function. That said, let's be honest, all the competitors are using large, nice-looking TFTs. Suzuki has gone with an LCD. At least you get full LED lighting front and rear, including the brake light and indicators. There's also a lithium battery, which helps keep the weight down. Speaking of which, how heavy is the GSX-R1000R? Suzuki lists a curb weight of 203 kilograms, which is roughly the same as the previous model. One more spec that might interest some of you, the seat height is 825 millimeters, which is typical for this class of bike. As for tires, their standard sizes, one 20/70/17 up front and one 90/55/17 at the rear. That means you can fit most common tire options. Fuel tank capacity is 16 liters. Oil capacity isn't mentioned. The bike is scheduled to be available from May next year, at least that's the plan. As for price, no official figures yet. We expect pricing to appear on Suzuki's official websites in the coming weeks. We are watching that closely and will let you know as soon as it's published. Now, just a quick word on the design. I touched on it earlier. I won't go into loads of detail because the photos speak for themselves and you can form your own opinion. There are 3 color options available. First, of course, is a white and blue combination with some red and black accents, classic Suzuki style. Then there's a mostly red and white version with a few black details. And finally, and I think this one's really cool, there's a sort of Rizzler or Corona style livery in yellow, blue, white and black. All 3 color options will be available from next year. And all of them feature the 40-year anniversary branding. There aren't any special editions. All versions include that commemorative detail. And I think that pretty much covers everything we currently know about the new Suzuki GSX-R1000R. If you've got any questions or if I've missed anything, feel free to drop it in the comments. I'd also love to know who among you is already keen on this bike and who's maybe thinking the competition has already moved on too far or is already available and not worth waiting for. Let me know. I'm genuinely curious because personally I'm really looking forward to this bike and I'm very excited to see how it stacks up against the competition that's out there, and there's plenty of it. And as always, we'd love it if you subscribe to the channel. A thumbs up is always appreciated, so thanks. Cheers and goodbye.